So I sort of looked at Bond's life, and I'd done Trigger Mortis, which is set just after the Goldfinger adventure. And then I began to think, well, what happened before Casino Royale? What happened, what do we know about James Bond in that formative year before he became 007? Now, in Casino Royale, he does mention that he kills two people, one of them in New York and the other one in Stockholm. And I thought, well, that's an interesting opening for the book. And I began to see, actually, that sort of the birth of James Bond, or at least the birth of the number, was an interesting story to tell.
It's a huge responsibility, isn't it? Because we've all grown up with James Bond. We all feel like we own him, really. And you mess with James Bond at your peril, don't you?
I think you mess with Bond at your peril, whatever you're doing within that world. For me, the most important thing when I'm writing a James Bond novel is to be absolutely true to Ian Fleming's vision. Nothing in the book would have surprised Ian Fleming. The clues are all there. I mean, some of the things about why he starts smoking a certain brand of cigarettes or why he likes his martini cocktail made in a certain way are sort of my interpolations or interpretations of what Fleming did. But I'm not suddenly saying, well, actually, he liked chocolate milkshakes too. So it's not, as I say, doing anything that will really sort of shock people. It's more a sort of a smiling acquiescence in the myth.
Writing in that vein, of course, does mean that you're writing in the 1950s, a time when sexism and racism was the norm.
Well, the 50s were racist and sexist if seen from the perspective of the 21st century. At the time, nobody was aware that they were those things. There was a sort of an innocence about those books. You could have added anti-Semitic too, because Bond often makes cracks about Goldfinger's Jewishness and such. So I think you have to accept them and park them. In writing new material, I would never wish to reflect any of those isms. I mean, it's why make enemies and why upset people? We live in a different age and one must be aware of 21st century sensitivities. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to whitewash Bond. I would add to that when it comes to the creation of a woman in a Bond novel, and in this case the character of 16, who is Bond's sort of associate, and I don't use the word Bond girl ever for obvious reasons, in creating her, I was very careful to create a broadly modern, independent, strong woman who really gives Bond a run for his money and is in many ways a better person than him.
She's great because, for a start, she's 10 years older than him and she actually teaches him things.
That's right. I think he learns a great deal from her. And I think what's also interesting in the relationship is that she's 10 years older than him. And that was an idea I actually sort of borrowed from Spectre with Monica Bellucci, who turned up and was brilliant, and for me not on the screen long enough. And I thought, wow, that's a wasted opportunity to actually have Bond, cavorting with a woman who is much older and wiser than him, and who gives him so much of his personality in this development of becoming 007. I thought that was really interesting and modern without being over PC.
Would you read us a bit from the book?
Bond couldn't help himself. He grabbed hold of her and pressed his lips against hers, his hand clamped on the flesh of her upper arm, holding her tight. He didn't know how she would respond. At that moment, he didn't care. Finally, he released her. 16 took a step back. Her dark hair had tumbled across her eyes, which glinted with anger, but also amusement. Well, 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 she exclaimed. The British spy can't get what he wants by consent, so he has to try force. She touched her hand to her lip. Is this how you treat your women? Given a choice, I think I prefer the enemy.
We're used now to seeing action men who are well-rounded characters. I'm thinking of Matt Damon's Bourne films. These are action men who kill without compunction, but they show their vulnerability. They have moments of self-doubt, and they're more likeable for it. So have you done any of that with James Bond?
What Ian Fleming did when he created James Bond was to create a Dark Knight. He doesn't have sort of deep felt emotions. He's not somebody who goes to the cinema or to the theatre. He doesn't like music particularly. He isn't an ordinary man. There is something almost of the sort of mythological figure, the Arthurian knight about Bond. But that said, in the books, he does have an attitude. I mean, in Casino Royale, he spends a whole chapter talking to Mathis about whether it is right to be fighting, for your country and fighting in wars. In later books, he thinks about resigning. He does even send Emma a letter of resignation in one of the books. He's turned by the Russians in later. There is a sort of a strange character development in the books, and certainly in Forever and a Day, and to an extent in Trigger Mortis. I am interested in trying to work out what makes this man tick as a human being as well as the world's greatest spy.
You probably wrote this quite some time ago now. You're always busy, you've got lots of projects on the go. What's next for you?
I've started a new series of books, which I hope I'll be talking about at the festival in Chiswick. The first one came out last year, a peculiar and unusual sort of whodunit called The Word is Murder. It's partly about murder and crimes, but it's also about writing and why we read whodunits and literacy and the whole world of books. So it's a sort of a strange amalgam and has done, I'm happy to say, very well, because I'm looking at doing 10 of these books in a series. The second one, I have it right here. Look, I can actually hold it up and show it. I get so proud when I finish a book. I only finished it 2 weeks ago, and The Word is Murder was the last one. This is another word for murder, and will be out in November.